My name is Kendra Wise, and I work in the Environmental Health Services at the Tulsa Health Department. And we are going to talk about Housing 101 today. So first, the reason why we're here is to discuss the Housing Code. And the reason why we have the Housing Code is to create safe neighborhoods. So we've all been in a situation where we have not had any air conditioning or electricity, like there was an ice storm or a tornado. And if you can think back to that point and how much stress it created on your life and how it affected your work or maybe your kids at school, it was a really, really stressful event in your life. And there are some people that live in that state of stress every single day. We also have lots of neighborhoods in Tulsa County that are experiencing kind of a degradation of the neighborhood. And if you have those couple of houses that are kind of teetering towards being dilapidated and unsecure, it could be an unsafe environment for our kids. So here at the Tulsa Health Department, we go into these neighborhoods and we enforce the housing code to make a safer place for our families. So at the Tulsa Health Department, we have several city ordinances and statutes that we operate off of. Inside the city limits, we have Title 24 for nuisances, so that's like high grass and weeds, trash, junk, and debris, and mosquito harborage. And we also have Title 55 for our building code. So whenever we have a landlord-tenant type situation, if a landlord is not keeping the property up to code, we can use Title 55 to enforce and make repairs. Outside of the city of Tulsa, you have the Landlord-Tenant Act, and so if there is a dispute for a landlord-tenant type situation, that falls on the Landlord-Tenant Act. And then we also have Title 63 for county nuisances, and that's like high grass and weeds, mosquito harborage, trash, junk, and debris out in the county. So Title 55 in that city ordinance gives the environmental health specialist the right of entry into a property. And one thing that we always have to remind people, I do not have the right to just walk into somebody's house and do an inspection. I have to be invited. So Title 55 gives me that duty. And at the Tulsa Health Department, Environmental Health Services inspects housing complaints inside of Tulsa County. We have the authority to require landlords and apartment managers to repair and correct violations inside the city of Tulsa. We work with tenants and landlords to not create more stress. And we also have to regulate city of Tulsa structures differently than county structures. So the county doesn't have a building code. They don't have an equivalent to Title 55. So if we have a situation out in the county where a house has become dilapidated or unsafe, we're not really able to enforce those building codes. We did start doing courtesy inspections. So if a tenant calls and they're having issues, we can go and do an inspection and send a copy to the owner and to the tenant, and they can use that if they want to pursue the issue in court. Tulsa County is divided up into 5 different districts, and we have environmental specialists that are the inspectors for all complaints in every part of the county, and you can see how the districts are broken up here. So our process works basically on a complaint. We get these complaints through the phone, referral, or online through the website. Our group is really focused on customer service, and the complaint is assigned to the district environmental specialist. The complainant is contacted by the environmental specialist to discuss the complaint and explain the process, answer any questions, and then we even schedule appointments if needed. And then whenever the environmental specialist gets a hold of the complaint, we take a look and decide what the public health threat is to determine the priority. We also review past complaints, and we take a look at maybe other complaints that are happening in the neighborhood to see if we have any trends. We really try to take a proactive approach on neighborhoods. If we see that a neighborhood is getting a lot of complaints, or if we see lots of properties that have visible violations from the outside, we'll do a survey of the neighborhood and send out notice of violations to try to get a handle on what's going on in the neighborhood before it gets too bad. Whenever we're looking at the complaint, we also determine our response time. So if it's a surfacing sewage type of a complaint, we'll basically drop what we're doing and head out to investigate. If it is a no heat or an unsafe heat type situation, we would probably have a less than 24-hour response. If it's something simple like a high grass and weeds, it might take us up to 3 days to respond to it, depending on how busy we are. So if you look at our most common calls that we get, some of them we don't regulate, like mold or bed bugs, but we do a lot of education on these issues to help people remedy their problems. We like to look at our department, environmental health, as a filter, so we get lots of questions that have nothing to do with what we regulate or enforce or educate, but we're always able to find people that can help answer the question. So whenever we approach a complaint, of course, we're taking a look at the exterior of the property first. We're looking for high grass and weeds, standing water, for mosquito harborage, maybe rodent harborage, taking a look to see if the doors and windows are secure, if the building is vacant, the peeling paint, wood rot, to see if the stairs are safe. We might look and see if there's a stagnant pool. We do regulate stagnant pools. We can treat them with larvicide to help prevent mosquito larvae. If you're inside the city of Tulsa, we would refer those pools over to the city to be drained. The next slide is other exterior violations that we might see that we would send a notice of violation or an order to repair. And then once we move into the inside, if that's relevant, we're taking a look at the paint, possible lead exposure. I want to point out that you cannot have like sheets or curtains up as doorways. This is a common problem. Doorways on bathrooms and bedrooms are required to have doors for privacy issues. You cannot rent a property as is in the state of Oklahoma. It does have to meet code requirements. On the next slide, you can see more examples of interior violations that we might see. And on the next slide, here's like a case study, sort of how we would handle the situation. So we got a call from a young woman. She's a professional. She works in a doctor's office. She moved into the state and rented a place for her and her son. Whenever she moved in, she realized that the house was not completely remodeled, and discussing with the owner the things that needed to be done, a time frame, and they agreed that they would get these items taken care of. You can see like the kitchen doesn't have countertops. There's lots of repair issues in the restroom. The hot water tank had been red tagged by ONG. They had lots of issues in this house. Over a period of time, the owner, it became clear, was not going to make these repairs, so we went in to do an inspection. We sent an order to repair to the owner and also a notice to vacate, and we'll show you those in a couple of slides. And the order to repair just basically lists all of the violations, and it gives the time frame that needs to be, that those violations need to be taken care of. And because some of these violations were considered imminent health hazards, which we'll go over later in the slideshow, they were given a notice to vacate. And whenever the owner did not make these repairs or contact the inspector, in the time frame allowed, that tenant was then able to leave the house and not be subject to the lease anymore. So that's kind of how it works, and then no one can go into that house. It was ruled condemned, and no one can live there until the owner repairs the violations. Now, you can go in and you can do your repairs and you can move out, but you can't live there until the repairs are done. So on the next slide, we talk about the different types of corrective actions. So notice of violation is the name of the form that we send out for nuisance complaints, like high grass and weeds, mosquito harborage, and trash, junk, and debris, especially out like in the county. And then your order to repair and correct is what is sent out for your basic building code violations. And if they fall into the imminent health hazard category, then you'll get an order to vacate. And then if those corrections are not made, then we can do a condemnation. We also have the power to issue warnings and citations in the city of Tulsa. We also partner with the city of Tulsa for the houses that we have to condemn. The water meter is flagged so that if in the future the landlord tries to move someone in, they cannot, because when they go to turn their water on, it will say, contact the health department, this property's been condemned. Now, on the notices that we send to the owner, here's an example of an order to vacate. So copies will be mailed out, certified mail, and also posted to the property. Copies are given to the tenants. The time frame for correction depends on the severity of the violation. And the environmental specialist is able to discuss the violations and corrective timeline with the owner or manager. Next, you'll see the order to repair. I want to draw your attention to the last page. The first couple pages are just kind of the legal part of the order. You'll see on the bottom of the first page that it says that you cannot sell a property with orders attached to it without the new owner knowing that they have a order to repair attached to that property. On the very last page, you can see a picture of a table of violations. This is just what the code says, but then underneath you'll see what the inspector actually saw during the inspection. So that's really the most important part, is that list there. So we have a list of condemnable violations. These are imminent health hazards, and we call them the Big 10. Examples like no water, surfacing sewage, electric and pool repair, no fire protection, and we'll go over these individually. So next, no water service. If we have a house that someone is living in that has no water, we'll issue a 10-day order to repair and correct and a 10-day order to vacate. Of course, you need water for sanitation and cleaning, but also personal hygiene and preparing meals. Now, open sewage is sort of a big deal. Anytime there's surfacing sewage or a house is not properly hooked up to an approved sewage system, then we can issue a order to repair, and within 48 hours the violation has to be corrected, or we can contact the city of Tulsa to remove the water meter from the house. And these are the type of violations that we will basically respond to immediately. We take sewage very seriously. More examples of open sewage. This is a pit that someone turned a pump off and the sewage was going out into the yard. For inadequate heat, especially this time of year, between October 1st and April 1st, we respond to these complaints very quickly. A landlord is required to provide a safe heating source, minimum 65 degrees in all livable spaces, and space heaters are not approved as the only heat source. We do a lot of education this time of year on safe heat, talking about smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, and not plugging space heaters into extension cords and running those cords throughout the house. We want to make sure that homes in Tulsa County are safely heated. If they are not, we will send an order to repair and also an order to vacate. Lots of examples of ventless heaters. ONG will not allow a ventless heater as its only heat source. It does require an oxygen detection and has to be approved for indoor use and no open flame. We have seen people use stoves, gas stoves and electric stoves as a heat source, especially during like an ice storm. It is very unsafe to use stoves as a heat source. These units are not designed to heat, and they can create a carbon monoxide issue. Propane tanks inside of houses are never a good idea. If you remember, these type of ventless heaters, lots of older houses have them. Not safe, especially in newer houses that are sealed up more tightly. You have a lot of carbon monoxide issues. Wood burning stoves could be okay if they're installed properly. You can see that this house caught on fire. I'm not sure it's for the wood burning stove, but it's an interesting picture. Electric being in poor repair is another one of the big 10 imminent health hazards. This is where we like to say, I know just enough about electricity to get myself into trouble. So if I have a feeling that there's something going on in a house, like this breaker box here, we will require that an electrician take a look at the house, and we will be checking for invoices, contacting the electrician, maybe even a letter to show that the house is safe. Lots of other electrical violations, like this hot water tank that's improperly installed. Generators, of course, need to be on the outside of the house, not on the inside. We see this a lot during power outages. Another Big 10 violation is gas ventilation and poor repair, so hot water tanks need to be properly installed. Plumbing facilities. So this is one of those where you could have a leaky faucet. That's obviously not a condemnable violation, but you could also have like surfacing sewage or cross connection or backflow issues. So whenever we have a really important plumbing, it can be considered a condemnable. And we could also, kind of the same as the electrician, we could contact the plumber and check for invoices and make sure that plumbing was done properly. So on the next slide, you can see different types of plumbing issues. Just a minor leak to surfacing sewage, the bathtub wouldn't drain, lots of drainage issues around the house, and then just the complete chaos in that kitchen. The next slide, this was one of my most favorite stories. It is a house in Midtown, and they had an outhouse in a shed that you would buy at a home improvement store because they did not have water. The next slide, no fire protection. We do require that there are smoke detectors in the house. The windows need to open. If you have the guards on windows, they need to be easily opened from the inside so that if there's a fire, people can get out. The fire department does have houses that that hoarders live in. They call them path houses. They have them marked in their system so that if there is an emergency, they know that it could be dangerous for the firefighters to enter. And we talk about improper use of heaters and not using extension cords. Another unsafe equipment like elevators or escalators being unsafe. And then on the next slide, the structure itself being a danger to health, safety, and property. If a structure lacks protection from fire, if it contains unsafe equipment, or if part of the structure is likely to collapse, it can also be a condemnable structure. So we do have lots of common violations like mold, roaches, mice, rats, bed bugs, asbestos, and different types of nuisances. So for mold, we do not regulate mold in the state of Oklahoma, and it's kind of hard to tell if you were going to do a test of mold inside of a house, if the mold was coming from inside or outside because of the type of environment that we live in. So what we try to do is stop the moisture, and then of course you'll stop the mold problems. And we also educate the tenant and the homeowner on proper mold cleanup. So whether they're using a bleach water solution or a detergent water solution to clean the mold and keep the area dry. So roaches, mice, and rats, of course, spread disease. This is another one of those instances where it could be the tenant's responsibility. We go back to the lease and to check and see who's responsible for keeping up with extermination. One thing is whenever a tenant moves in, that the structure that they are renting does need to be vermin-free before they move in. So with bed bugs, it's really hard to determine what the origin of the bed bug infestation is. Bed bugs are not currently a public health nuisance, so we try to educate the public on proper treatment and prevention. Bed bug issues can be addressed through the Landlord-Tenant Act. With asbestos, an apartment complex with 3 or more units that is built before 1981, OSHA wants you to assume that there is asbestos, and if you're going to do repairs, it needs to be tested. The Department of Labor wants you to go ahead and have those areas tested if you're going to make a cut into the wall or ceiling during repairs. Now, the Landlord-Tenant Act does require that meth houses be remediated to a standard, and of course they talk about that in the Act. A house can be re-rented after it's properly cleaned and tested for safety. The Tulsa Health Department does receive list of houses that the Tulsa Police Department suspect have been meth houses, and we do our investigation and send orders and talk to the owner about proper cleanup. So throughout the presentation, we've talked about the different types of violations that we see and the different orders that we might send in different situations and our basic process. So I really want to stress that we handle every complaint as a standalone. Every situation is different. We have to talk to the tenants, we have to talk to the owner. There's 2 sides to every story. We are completely aware that sometimes tenants take advantage of situations and sometimes owners take advantage of situations, and we just really have to work through all of that. And when it comes down to it, just get the violations corrected and move on. So we created this renter walkthrough inspection. It's available on our website, and we really encourage owners to use this as a tool to walk through the property with a tenant during the lease signing process, to mark things that might be missing, like a smoke detector. A lot of times that situation where a tenant's trying to find a place to live is stressful and they might not think about every possible scenario. You can use this walkthrough, you can change it and add things that you want to have added. If there is something missing, you can both decide on a correction time and sign off, and then later on, if things go bad and smoke detectors are missing, they have signed off on a document that says that they were there when you did your initial walkthrough. One thing that the Tulsa Health Department really tries to focus on are healthy homes. So there are lots of hazards that we encounter in a home that can cause health issues. And there are a list of health issues here, like asthma, allergies, behavior and learning problems, lung cancer, and poisonings. So one thing that you'll notice from this list is that there's some things that tenants are clearly responsible for, like tobacco smoke, but then there are other things that owners are responsible for, like providing heat or other issues that might go wrong in a home. So there really is 2 sides to every story, and our goal is just to get the violations corrected. We encourage owners and tenants to just sort of have an open dialogue with the environmental specialist and to let us know what's going on, and we can try to work through the issues together. We do have a list of local and state agencies, important numbers to remember, and then also our main line and a list of our inspectors. Bernard Dendy is our program manager, and Adam Austin is our field supervisor, and then the environmental specialists are listed below. That's all for today for Housing 101, and if you have any questions at all or any suggestions, please feel free to give us a call at 918-595-4200. Thank you.